When the storm passed, we thought it was over.
Some
the silence that
paths
followed
are meant
wasn't
to be
peace.
traveled together.
It was waiting. Beneath the mountain, something was listening back. I found the signal again, buried under the ice, beating like a second heart inside the valley. The hollow map wasn't a message, it was an alarm, and we had already triggered it. Coda hears it now. The pulse, the breath, the voices trapped in the frozen air whispering my name. Whatever they built down there, it's awake, and it remembers us. We stood with the welded plate at my eye level, my breath sliding off cold steel in small, useless clouds. T2 access, the stamp said, like a polite name on a locked grave. The slag beads along the seam were young, dull, still proud, the way a scar is bright before the sun has had a year to flatten it. My palm left a fog print. The metal kept its own counsel. Behind us, the nav room breathed, steady now, the lightning stable lamp a green ember on the panel. 3 distant node lights, T1, T2, T4, twinkled as if curiosity itself had circuits. Coda stood to my left, nose a handspan from the plate, ears forward, tail still. Not a growl, a reading. We weren't the first to stand here. A boot scuff angled away from the threshold toward the deeper tunnel and back, hesitant, like a man who knows which doors are final. A faint streak of graphite dust smudged high on the jamb, the kind a gloved knuckle leaves when it steady holds a heavy thing. Who welded you shut? I asked. The mountain, as usual, answered the way the old men do, by changing the subject just enough to keep you honest. The speaker in the nav room carried my father's unflappable tone. Sheer front receding, secondary flows mild. Window, 90 minutes. 90 minutes. A fortune. Or a trap big enough to lie down in. I ran the stern label between my thumb and forefinger, the scrap I'd peeled from the siphon box in the lightning trench. The typography had money in it. Modest money, but money still. Stern in clipped capitals. No serif to snag meaning, not government, corporate. A company that wants to make everything look like it has always been theirs. Coda drew a breath through his nose the way he does when he's counting. The seam smelled like oil under clean metal, fresh install under old bones. He turned his head toward the listening gallery, then back to the plate, as if to say, "This door keeps the ears from each other." "All right," I told him, "let's make them rude again." I set the lantern on the floor and looked for sins. Welders leave signatures. The beadwork on the top edge was too tidy for a field job. The side seams wandered, hurried hands. The bottom lip had a drip trail where somebody yanked the torch too fast. One pad eye had been added and then ground off, second thoughts. In the lower right corner, 3 faint chisel nicks tried and failed to begin a pry. A man had stood where I was standing and thought better. I unpacked the little mag drill I'd built from a sawed-off hand drill and an old speaker magnet. It stuck like a tick. I measured once, twice, set the bit at the seam, and gave the mountain a new small, serious sound. The drill's bite was steady and modest. I gave it oil and patience. It gave me a coin of steel. Coda watched the corridor, body pointed toward the dark. Nose checked to the door every few seconds as if his head had learned a metronome. The first hole winked. The second spit sparks that weren't mine. A flash blew. Flinch behind the seam, like a sensor-hating daylight. I stopped, hand on the trigger, pulse suddenly loud. "Easy," I said to my heart. To the door, to the century. I reached for the field sniffer in my pack, a cheap, hungry meter with a strip of LEDs and a mean streak when it smelled live current. The seam lit half its teeth. Somebody had laid a signal wire in the weld. Not power, alarm, the kind of loop that cries if you break it. Of course you did, I murmured. The decision felt like a slim bridge in wind. If I clipped the loop wrong, whoever watched would wake. If I backed off, the hollow would stay isolated where it had been taught to die polite. I set the contrast amp on the sniffer and mapped the loop by ear. The rise and fall of the meter's whine as the probe walked the seam. The wire was sloppy at the bottom, tight at the header, spliced below the left hinge. I picked the sloppy. Sloppy is where men cut corners. Sloppy is where careful people win. Head behind, I told Coda. He pressed in, chest to my shin, waiting to be the fact that would keep me from flinching. I slid the bare back of my knife spine under the weld. When I felt copper, I eased a razor under the jacket and nicked it, not through, just enough to get a grip. I stripped a kernel of wire back, slid 2 resistors out of a tin film canister, and bridged the loop with a little faux load, a lie that said still closed. The sniffer's howl dropped from angry to bored. The LEDs fell to one steady, lazy eye. Sleep, I told it. Then I cut. The loop didn't scream. Somewhere, a screen still believed we were the gentlemen who welded the door in the first place. Moment of honesty, I said, and set the pry bar at the lower seam. Steel groaned like a bad memory. Coda held his breath. The seam opened a 1/4 inch, windless and offended, then 1/2 inch. Cold came through in a thin sheet. The smell on that breath wasn't the usual recipe: rock, old paper, carbon. It was industrial fresh. Clean cable, oiled gears, coolant whiff. Someone had built a room on the far side with air it was proud of. I pried the top hinge. The plate leaned, arrogant. I stowed the bar, took a breath, and heaved the door out with the plain strength winter gives you if you feed it enough anger. It skidded on slag beads, kissed the concrete, and settled. A polite, heavy argument ended for now. The T2 gallery lit itself at our intrusion. Motion sense strips blinked awake along the ceiling, their light too white for the 1950s. The room was a twin to our listening gallery, upgraded by 27 memos and an expense account. New racks, new patch panels, a server cube in the corner with a stern badge so shy it almost apologized for existing. The black glass panes looked into bays like ours, but microphones gleamed on articulated stalks, modern, hungry, precise. At the far wall, a feed conduit punched into old concrete, jacketed, labeled with handsome printed tags. I read them the way you read a stranger's mail. T2 main, stern JCTA, E-meter, return, PIAC, uplink and backhaul annotated in tidy caps. The siphon box we drowned had been a field nibble. This was the mouth. Someone leased the mountain, I said. My voice sounded wrong in the bright. Coda trotted a slow perimeter, smelling the grid. New plastics, old dust, the pale mint of dielectric grease. He stopped at the server cube, lifted his head to the vent, and gave a single annoyed huff. Hot electronics. Fans. A heartbeat. Not human, but present. A panel on the rack ran open by a casual 1/4 inch. I palmed it, and it swung like a lie with a hinge. Inside, power supplies, neat as a lunchroom, and a slot for a hot swap drive with a missing tooth. One bay empty, dustless. Someone had pulled data in a hurry. A coiled fiber hung loose, labeled with a date, 2 months ago. I reached for the console on the side shelf, no monitor. A handheld with a rugged case and proprietary connectors. The power button blinked its indifferent blip. The screen offered a login with a stern logo below, a bland welcome. I thumbed the port on the bottom. My field shortwave couldn't talk that language. but the nav board could. The hollow was old, but it knew how to translate pressure and time. People were just the adapters. Coda, I said. He came to heel. I hooked the handheld to a bare terminal on the T2 rack with a pigtail I shouldn't have had any right to possess. The mag coil in my pack hummed. The nav room's uplink wasn't just a light, it was a throat. I wrenched the signal path back on itself, into the hollow. The handheld's login flickered once, twice. Then, for one frame only, it betrayed a back-end address and a unit name. Stern Blackwater AI Car Field Acquisition. That's enough, I said, and dropped the link. We didn't need their secrets. We needed proof that the map had been stolen and repackaged as product. The bay glass to my right showed nothing but its own clean black. I lifted a pair of headphones from their hook, new, too pliant, and slid them on. The sound was the same language as ours, but quantized, sampled, clipped, filed square. The breath was still a breath, but someone had squared its edges and called it data. The shame in me showed as a grin. Engineers do 3 things well: listen, lie clean, and leave notes. I set the headphones down and looked for the scrawl a union of tired men leaves for themselves. Found it on the underside of the rack shelf, written in silver Sharpie where only the curious would stare. Don't join your ground to theirs. They feed, not fix. J. Pike Pike. The name from the old ledger. Someone had left himself alive in a sentence. Coda's body changed one notch. He angled toward the corridor we'd come from. I heard it then. The soft chuff-chuff of snow tires far above, the way a pressure in the earth carries the shape of a low truck on a high road, not close, not ours. A schedule, moving. I unplugged. I closed the panel with my breath so it wouldn't click. We left the server cube humming to itself and carried the handheld out of habit and evidence on the door frame in paint so thin it was half thought. Someone had written Field Office A and then tried to sand it off. The sanding had left a lighter rectangle where a placard had hung. I pressed my thumb into the square and lifted it. A faint outline stayed, stern in lowercase and a wave glyph. Back through the seam, back into honest dark. I reset my fake loop, snugged the resistors into their bed, and used my thumb to smudge my prints the way my father had taught me to do only when the reason was bigger than manners. The nav room welcomed us like a sane kitchen after a fluorescent hallway. The network plate now registered active partial plus. The new tiny lights on the rim had settled into a real pattern, the hollow seeing around corners it had been forbidden to see. The listening gallery glass breathed with the town. Radios, pails, the bell rope's wooden handle, a skillet hitting a railing every 4 seconds. Mary, conducting the valley. I set the stern handheld down on the bench beside the breath countdown reel. It sat there like a lie that had agreed to testify. Rivers, the radio said, low-town woman's voice, back and calm with that tremor that comes when all 3 big things have finally aligned: work, luck, and witness. We've got trucks headed your way, mill convoy. They say they're on contract. They keep using the word assets. They're not rangers. I looked at the weld dust on my knuckles and understood what the schedule had been. Data out, hardware in, backhaul through T2, lease the mountain, own the weather. Copy, I said, as how long? 30 minutes, maybe less. The mountain answered with my father's voice. Secondary wind shift to 43. Window. 62 minutes. Enough to close a door the right way. I took the carpenter's pencil and wrote on the wall where the ink receded when you showed it your skin. not on the lime with the old names. On the strip my father had left for new ones. T2 unwelded, stern siphon found. Don't join your ground to theirs. C Rivers plus Coda. I put my palm on the black and let it drink my heat until the line sank and stilled. Coda pressed his forehead to my wrist and signed the page the only way he knew. We finished T1, I said, and then we go upstairs. Coda licked his nose like a man ties his boots. The hollow map glowed with the obstinate light of a body that knows what it's for. The town pulsed in its pains. Small lives doing large work. Above us, tires moved toward a door they thought would be grateful to be opened. We had 62 minutes to teach them no. The mountain had gone still again, not in peace, but in that charged stillness before a heartbeat decides what kind of life to keep. The nav room breathed its steady rhythm. The map's rim lights pulsed like a sleeping animal's ribs. The siren's echo from Lowtown now faint enough to be memory. Outside, the convoy was climbing. 30 minutes, the woman's last radio said. Trucks, contracted, carrying orders, not rescue. Coda's ears tracked the low thunder beneath the stone. Distant engines, heavy tires on frozen road. Not military cadence, civilian, corporate. They came to reclaim their experiment, not the people it had nearly drowned. We've got 62 minutes here, and I told him. We use them right. He didn't blink. Just waited for the decision I was already making. The T1 corridor branched west, down where the old miners' shafts met the listening network. The schematic on my father's map had been marked only with a circle and the word quiet in penciled capitals. The older notes, Pike's maybe, had written beneath it in smaller hand, keep it that way until it's safe to speak again. The quiet door wasn't welded, it was bolted. 4 hand-turn bars, brass-headed and smooth with decades of fingers. A single light bulb hung crooked over it, its filament trembling faintly like a thought afraid of being finished. Coda sniffed the base of the door, nose flattening the dust. Then he sneezed twice, the signal we'd shared for metal and heat. There's current, I said. Somebody left the candle burning. I twisted the first bar. It moved easily as though the door wanted to see daylight. The second came slow. The third complained. The fourth needed the hammer's persuasion. When the last one spun, the bulb steadied, an involuntary inhale from the power behind it. The door opened inward. A dry room waited, unusual for a mountain. Its walls had been clay-sealed long ago to keep moisture out, to keep air still. Dust settled like velvet. On the floor, a narrow trench filled with copper wire leading to a pedestal not of steel but oak, polished by hand, oil, and patience. Upon it sat a wooden box 2 feet long, dovetailed corners, a brass handle. The only inscription was carved into the lid, for when they listen wrong. Coda circled once, tail low. He sat facing the box as if it were a person. I wiped my glove across the lid, hesitated, then lifted it. Inside, real recorders, 3 of them, stacked like prayer wheels, and a folded sheet of lined paper. I lifted it with both hands, pencil scrawl in a careful working man's print. If they ever turn the ears to sell what they hear, this is the reset. Connect all breath counters. Bleed the fuses. The lightning will ground to itself. You'll lose power, not people. When it's done, the hollow will sleep until someone honest knocks again. J. Pike. So that was Pike's insurance. A quiet door that could teach the whole system how to forget. A lever sat at the bottom of the box, simple as a broom handle. Handwritten tape beneath. Reset breath. 1 chance. I imagined the map's face in the nav room. Rim lights pulsing, towns breathing, wires humming like veins. Pulling this lever would silence it all. The honest world would live. But the stolen network, the one the stern trucks were coming for, would wake up dead. Coda looked up at me. His ears twitched once. A question, not fear. Yeah, I said softly, it's that kind of choice. We followed the copper trench backward to the wall where a panel labeled Breathe Bus was mounted. 6 thick leads connected it to the fuses we'd serviced in the lightning trench. The 7th was cut and coiled, a MUR labeled T2 feed. I traced the coil with my hand. Warm. Active. The stern install was still stealing charge. They were already pulling current, maybe data, maybe both. The trucks above weren't coming to build. They were coming to harvest. I took the wire cutters from my belt and paused. Once I clip this, I told Coda, they lose the signal, but so do we. He tilted his head, a small, resigned yes. I cut. The bulb flickered once, went dark. In the nav room, a low mechanical groan echoed down the hall as circuits felt their limb go numb. My radio spat a burst of static, then the woman's voice, faint but holding on. Rivers were power drop? The siren stopped. What's happening? Keep your people uphill, I said. We're taking their teeth. Who's they? You'll know if they reach you. Don't let them. The mountain's ours. A moment static, then a quiet, brave copy. I replaced the cutters, exhaled through my teeth, and looked at the wooden lever. My father had taught me about mercy that doesn't come with witnesses. Sometimes, he'd said, the right thing sounds like failure to everyone who wasn't there. I wrapped my hand around the handle. Coda, I said, and he came to my side, shoulder to my knee. We pulled together. The lever resisted like conscience. Then it went. A clean, heavy thunk followed by a shudder that rolled through the clay walls and up into the rafters. The copper trench glowed once, faint, orange, beautiful, and went dark. Far above, something deep as thunder moved through the bones of the world. The map's hum stopped. For a second, silence had texture, soft, total, honest. Then a faint whine began to build in the distance, and the kind of sound that doesn't belong to wind or machine, but to release. I stepped into the hall, lantern swinging. A low pressure rolled past us, warm then cold. As the breath counters purged their charge, the hollow was exhaling. All the years of caught lightning, all the lies, venting themselves back into the mountain. Behind us, the quiet door closed itself with a sigh and stayed shut. The brass handle glowed faintly in the dark, not from heat, but from having done what it was made for. Good work, I whispered. Now we run. We moved fast, the tunnels alive again with air. The listening gallery buzzed faintly, feedback humming like distant bees. The glass panes no longer showed lights or waves, just faint fogs, soundless. The network was blind again, and free. Back in the nav room, the disk lay dark, the rim lights dead except for one, the smallest green jewel at the bottom right, flickering weakly as though something refused to die entirely. Hey, I said to it, palm on the steel, we kept your promise. Rest. Coda sniffed the console, then the stern handheld still lying there. The screen, long dead, blinked once, faint text ghosting across, signal lost. Good. But then, another sound. Not mechanical, not mountain, from far above. The grind of an elevator, the echo of boots, the metallic clink of tools being lowered. They were here. Stern's convoy had reached the access level. Coda looked at me, every muscle translating the same word, up. Yeah, I said, grabbing my pack, the recorder reels, and the letters from the old mail crate. We go greet our guests. The map gave one final breath through the speaker. Faint, my father's tone now layered with Pike's gravel, and something new behind it like the wind itself speaking through the wires. Remember the order: people, ground, paper. I nodded. Copy that, old man. We hit the ladder, up the shaft, through stale air that smelled of old rain and newer oil, past the relay room where the chalk still read power first, signal second, hope last. I brushed the words with my glove, leaving a streak of soot beside the last one. Not erasing, just reminding. Halfway up, the tremor hit, not quake, not surge, boots on the steel grate above, voices, the clipped consonants of men used to intercoms, not conversation. Feed dropped at 1400 hours. Backup cell engaged? No uplink, they pulled it from below. Pause. Then we go get it back. Coda's ears flattened. His breath went silent. I held my hand over his collar. Not to hold him, but to share heartbeat pace. We waited until the voices moved east, toward the shack, not the shaft. The mountain covered our breathing. I took one more glance down, into the warm dark where the disk had finally gone quiet. Good night, Hollow, I said. You've earned it. We climbed the last 20 feet to the hatch. It gave to a careful push. The night air came in sharp, the kind of cold that burns clean. The slope below was dark except for the convoy's floodlights cutting across the white. 5 trucks, black-painted, logoed stern with the wave glyph. Men unloading cases, unspooling cable toward the hatch we'd just left. They were building a tap. They didn't know the socket was already gone. Coda crouched beside me, one paw over the hatch lip, eyes silver in the snow light. I could feel him thinking. The line between duty and bite. We don't fight here, I whispered. We make them think the mountain doesn't want them. From the relay shaft, the last of the lightning's aftercharge hissed faintly through the rods, static ghosts crawling along the antenna wires. I slung a lead from my pack, clipped it to the relay post, and threw the other end into the snow beside the nearest truck. The spark was small but sharp. The ground beneath the convoy cracked with light. Tires hissed. Men shouted. Someone yelled arc fault and killed the generator. Floodlights died, replaced by the dark. The mountain took a deep breath and returned to silence. I looked down at Coda. Quiet enough for you? He wagged once. Small, proud, complete. We turned toward the north ridge, away from the trucks, where the old ranger trail cut through the pines. The wind carried the first flakes of a new snowstorm, the kind that erases footprints without needing permission. Behind us, the hollow map slept. Ahead, the ridge waited, and whatever came after 62 minutes. Come on, partner, I said. We've got letters to deliver. We disappeared into the white. The ridge took us in the way a river takes a leaf, not cruelly, just with its own idea of direction. We moved under black spruce and white breath, wind braiding snow into ropes that pulled at our legs. The convoy's lights dwindled behind us, then died completely when the generator choked on our little trick. In the sudden dark, the mountain recovered its old grammar. Coda ranged 10 yards out, ghosting between trunks, returning to touch my thigh with his shoulder every 50 steps. I'm here, you're here, keep going. The simplest sentence in our language. The sky above the timberline flickered with a low auroral smear, green like a bruise. Good sky for a bounce. We crossed the switchback where the ranger trail forgets its own name and climbed a wind-scoured spur to a clearing no larger than a living room. The far edge fell away into the kind of night that swallows lamps, to our left, a shape hunched against the horizon. The North Ridge mast, skeletal and stubborn, guy wires singing a frost-tuned note. My father had brought me here once in summer when clouds made a river out of the valley. He'd thumped the mast with his knuckles and said, half proud, half guilty, it'll talk farther than we mean it to. Metal utility box sat half buried at the mast's base, its lid held shut with a padlock as old as the county. The postmaster key, warm print worn smooth by my chest, hesitated in my hand, then slid home as if it had been waiting for this exact weather. Inside, a coiled ladder line, a boxy field tuner, a canvas envelope thick with call signs written in pencil, and a rigger's notebook wrapped in wax paper. On the notebook's cover, in the dense, practical hand I now knew as J. Pike's, North Ridge Signal, for when the valley can't shout. Coda sat with his back to the wind and watched the slope below. New lights snaked across the white. The convoy reorganizing, a portable dish assembling on tripods, a backhaul awakening. They would try to phone home. We would try to beat them to the sky. I clipped the ladder line to the mast feed through, skinned the ends with my knife, and tightened them under nickel screws. The wind made a hand drum of the line, slapping it against the pole. I tuned the field box by feel, the way you tune a guitar in the dark, counting clicks and listening for the way the wire wanted to hum. Pike's notebook fell open to a page soft with use. Auroral skip, K-band, Sachem, shortwave sweep. Under it, a simple sequence: call, proof, breath, names. The idea was elegant and wrong proof. Call every ear in the cold, wide world that still listens, prove what you are, send the breath count as a signature a liar wouldn't know to fake, and then speak your names while the sky still cares. I took the breath countdown reel from my pack, the one we'd pulled from T3B, and snapped it into the little reel deck the box had hidden in its gut. The deck was battery-fed, old, and gorgeous. The capstan ticked like a polite watch. I spliced a line from its output into the tuner's keying jack. The breath would modulate our call, a mountain's voice riding the wire. Coda shifted. Weight forward, muzzle lifted. Far below us, a cheer went up. Short, brittle, not joyful. The stern men had power again. A dish silhouette ghosted into the green smear, tilted, and found its first star. Time to get loud. All right, I said, and my voice vanished into the wind. Let's wake the polite ghosts. I thumbed the hand key, a piece of brass with a cloth-wrapped cord, and sent the first call on a frequency that had outlived a dozen wars. CQ, North Ridge calling. The wire sang in my bones. The mast hummed. The aurora shivered like silk. Static answered with its old teeth. Then a human tone rose out of the noise. Thin, eager, real. North Ridge, this is K7 Alf, Alfred in Kalispell. Thought you were a rumor, friend. K7 Alf, copy. Need a relay. Recording to follow. I flipped the deck and let the breath play. The tape fed the keying input. The signal lifted and fell in that peculiar pulse the hollow map had taught itself to hear. No businessman would imagine this signature. It wasn't commerce. It was weather with a heartbeat. Lord, Alfred said softly, not for me, but for the room he was in. You boys aren't kidding. Not boys, I said, just listeners. Recording ending, statement follows. I pressed the key again, this time in clean voice. To any receiving station, this is Caleb Rivers at North Ridge Mast. The Post 23 listening network has been reawakened to warn Lowtown of a Blackwater surge. We've shut it down clean to keep it honest. Corporate hardware labeled Stern attempted to siphon the network and is now on site. This transmission contains identifiers and proof. I leaned into the wind and read numbers and dates until my tongue went numb. cereals from the siphon box, the handheld's back-end address, the timestamps in T2. For dessert, I gave them the order my father had written 30 years ago, and I had just chosen to keep: people, ground, paper. If you hold to that, I said quietly, you'll save bodies, not files. Alfred's voice came back sharpened with purpose. Copy all, recording, forwarding to Sheriff Net and State DES. I've also got a kid who runs a blog with more readers than the local paper. He donates to dogs. He'll like your partner. Coda looked up at his name like a man hearing a joke he hoped was about him. He sneezed once. I scratched his ruff with a glove coarse as bark. Alfred, one more thing, I said, when we're sending old mail, letters from the listening rooms, if we don't make it to town, get them there. Say the address. North Star Clinic, care of Ives Hale. Got it, son. The word son landed in me like a coal into a dry hearth. For a second I wanted to stay in that syllable, warm my hands over it, forget anything else had ever been true. The wind lifted. The aurora brightened like someone turned a page. Far below, Stern's dish locked. A chirp popped out of the sky like a bubble, modern, encoded, the sound of money phoning home. Time to be uglier, I told Coda. Pike's notebook had one more trick: oppose their phase. The mast wasn't built for malice, but it had opinions. I slung a second wire from the tuner to a buried counterpoise, a field of radial wires under the clearing, and shifted our phase just enough that any signal sharing our air would feel like it was walking up a down escalator. Alfred, I said, we'll count again. Record in triplicate. Standing by, Northridge. I rolled the reel. The breath strobed the ether. I rode the key along its peaks, and the mast obliged, its guy wires singing a second above my note. Below us, the stern dish chirped, hiccuped, chirped again, then dropped back into static. Men shouted. One kicked a tripod. The tripod kicked back. Coda's ears flattened briefly, not fear, focus. He pivoted toward the trail we'd taken up and gave a single woof, so small I felt it more in my ribs than in my ears. A shadow moved between trunks, a silhouette shedding snow as it came. One man, not fast, cautious. He wasn't sprinting for us, he was tracking. I let the key up and killed the deck. Alfred, we may have company. Wish I could send you a thermos and a platoon, he said. I'll keep the net hot. The shape split into two where the trail forked, and for a moment my heart miscounted. Then Coda huffed once. Same man, two prints. Clever. He had doubled back under the spruce skirt to come in on my breath while letting his decoy trail age out front. I whispered gratitude to every bored sergeant who ever made me spend a Sunday learning not to be impressed by footprints. I killed the field box, pulled the ladder line free, and stowed it fast. The mast kept humming, ghost current leaking into the sky like heat from a living thing. Hide, I whispered to Coda. He slid into the shadow of the utility box and went statue still, his eyes turning from lamps to flint. I stepped 5 paces into the clearing, open palms, empty, as if I'd come up here to ask the wind for a favor. The man who stepped from the trees wore a white shell over black, his hood up, a pair of goggles tilted to his brow. He carried no rifle, just a tablet and a rugged case hung on a chest sling. He had the same brand of young impatience the stern server room had. Neat, expensive, lonely. He took in the mast, the tuner, me. His breath plumed in short, ambitious bursts. Sir, he said, but not to salute, just to keep me human while he worked the problem. This is a private site. We're experiencing interference. Must be the weather, I said. The weather, he repeated, and looked at the aurora like it owed him an apology. He raised the tablet. The screen showed a spectrum, our breath in little comb, teeth marching along a bar, his eyes narrowed. "You're broadcasting a pattern." "You're stealing one," I said. His jaw made a good small fist. "We lease water rights, power rights, and subsoil array access." He said it like a catechism he'd passed on a test. "You lease attention?" I asked. "You lease warning? You lease a town's right to hear the difference between a story and a casualty list?" He lifted one shoulder, the sort of shrug you give physics. "We provide early event analytics to client municipalities and private insurers. Everyone gets paid." Then, almost kindly, "You're in the way." "Then step around," I said. He glanced toward the mast base, at the box now closed again, no wire showing. His brain took inventory, adding in plenty he couldn't see. "We have a window," he said. "Let us take what we need, and nobody gets hurt." "Nobody got hurt because we pulled the plug," I said. "Your dish talks again, and the first thing it'll learn to say is next time drown better. It's good for margins." His lips pressed. A boy being told the story wasn't his. "Walk down," I said. I kept my voice level, the way my father did when a fuse begged to be clever. "Tell your men the mast failed and the mountain doesn't want you. Take your trucks. Leave the door closed behind you." "And if I don't?" Coda slid from the shadow, not to menace, just to edit the scene into honesty. He stood at my knee, eyes on the man's hands. The man's gaze flicked, took in the dog, did quick math. A canine in the cold is not a pet. He is policy. "Northridge," Alfred's voice cracked through the wind in my earbud. "We just put your packet on 3 nets and 2 desks. Folks are calling your Lowtown already. The sheriff net is angry in your favor." The man watched my mouth when I smiled. "Hear that?" I asked. "You're late to your own story." He looked down at his tablet, the spectrum now blank because the mast was quiet and the breath had folded back into rock. He lost a year of swagger in a second and became something more common and more dangerous, tired. "We're just contractors, he said. "We don't pick who gets saved." "You do," I said. "Every time you pick where to point a dish." He looked past me at the aurora. His mouth softened. Some other life had wanted him once. A radio club, a patient uncle with a soldering iron, the honest thrill of making signal out of noise. Then he tucked the tablet against his chest. "We'll be back with a warrant," he said. But his voice made it a wish. "You'll be back to find an empty room," I said, with a note on the wall. "What note?" He was too young to be curious politely. "The order," I said. "People, ground, paper." He stood there a second longer like a man at a bus stop who's just remembered the bus is a river. Then he turned, walked to the trail, and chose his own prints. Coda watched him go, tail a low metronome. When the man vanished into spruce, Coda leaned into me. "Done. Not yet." We spun the field tuner into its box, coiled the line, and tucked the notebook into my coat. I slung the pack. The mast rang once and went quiet. Somewhere, the aurora laughed in green. The earbud crackled with Alfred's relief. "Northridge! The phones in Lowtown are melting. Sheriff says anybody with a stern jacket is going to be very busy filling out forms somewhere else tomorrow. You want me to hold the line open?" "Hold it," I said. "If we stop talking, it's because we're walking." We turned our backs to the mast and took the ridge north, under a sky that had decided on snow. Coda settled into an easy sharing pace, choosing the path that a man and a dog can take together and still arrive speaking. Halfway down, the wind found a slow register and stayed there, like the mountain humming to itself. I pressed my hand to the notebook through my coat, felt the cardboard give slightly, and not for the first time imagined my father's hand there instead. When the dark yielded at last to a faint gentling of sky, pre-dawn's dry rehearsal. The trees opened, and the North Star Clinic winked across the valley, one stubborn window burning yellow. Ives Hale would be there, hair braided with sleep, eyes carrying 2 towns' worth of wakefulness. "We deliver," I told Coda. He didn't need the promise, he just needed the work. We moved. The ridge fell away into blue. The storm closed behind us like a book that had decided to keep its ending for later. What remained was a thin line of breath, shared between a man, a dog, and a mountain that had learned how to listen and to speak when it mattered. We reached the tree line before dawn broke enough to pick a color. The air down in the flats had a different weight, less iron, more smoke, and the snow underfoot turned from crisp to heavy as we traded the mountain's grammar for the town's. The North Star Clinic burned its small yellow square like a ship's light in fog. I tapped Coda's shoulder. He matched my pace, then went one step slower. That quiet adjustment he makes when I've used up more night than I meant to. On the last drift before the parking lot, he froze, head high, eyes soft. A deer? No. The coffee reached us first, burned municipal, and then Ives Hale's voice through a cracked window, a small laugh escaping like steam. My chest found a new rhythm it had been practicing all night. We cut across the plowed apron. The clinic door opened before my hand reached it. Ives stood with her braid crooked and her sweater buttoned wrong, eyes bright from too little sleep and too much thinking. Coda pushed past me and leaned into her legs, that big and delicate way he reserves for the people who hold the most fragile things. "Caleb," she said, as if the word needed handling. "Mail delivery," I answered, lifting the oiled canvas bundle from inside my coat. The old mail. Letters from rooms that listen. "Late, not never." She took the weight with both hands. The canvas smelled of tea and dust and pencil, of men who had known how to wait. "We've been answering calls all night," she said. "Whatever you and your partner did, it made people brave enough to dial with names attached." "Names are the work," I said. Coda thumped his tail against my shin and noses. Inside, the clinic felt like a church that had said yes to too many weddings and not enough funerals. The triage cots were empty. A big whiteboard showed routed, cleared, accounted, check marks in green and blue. On the desk, a plate with 2 cookies powdered in the same snow that still rimed my gloves, and an orange skillet with a dent in it. I touched the skillet's lip. "Mary's baton?" I asked. Ives grinned. "She left it here when the siren stopped, and the skillet did the job instead. She says music is medicine." "It is," I said. "Wind carries it farther than orders." She set the mail on a cleared table, eased the string loose, and let the letters breathe. The first envelope she lifted had a child's drawing on the back, a mountain with an ear. I put my finger on the blue crayon. "Ruthie," I said. The girl who'd written to the men in the mountain like they were saints with screwdrivers. Ives traced the ear with her thumb. "We'll start with the children," she said. "A reading hour. We'll tell them where the warning comes from." "Tell them it comes from listening," I said, "and from refusing to sell the sound." She looked up. "Stern?" "Down for now," I said. "They'll be back with papers, but papers don't outrank ground if the town remembers." She pushed a hair behind her ear, and that small gesture had the weight of a vow. The sheriff net's already moving. State DES called me, then the county commissioner, then a reporter who asked if I believed in ghosts. She gave me a sideways look. I said I believe in witnesses. I wanted to hug her then like a man hugs a lighthouse. Instead, I brought the breath countdown reel from my pack and set it beside the letters. Proof, I said, and a lullaby. The door opened and 3 people came in together, piled into the frame like a comic strip. Mary with a thermos and a grin, Hank from the saw shop, hat in hand like he was about to apologize to the river, and Sheriff Callow with eyes that had learned how to listen before they learned how to squint. Coda walked between them like a fuse connecting circuits. Mary set the thermos on the desk. Coffee, she said. Also contrition cupcakes. I figured the mountain appreciates dessert. She looked at the letters, sucked a breath. Oh. Hank hovered a step back as if the mail could still bite. I said some things yesterday, he murmured, voice sawing the grain from the right angle. About you. About your dog. The river taught me a word, almost. I almost drowned, and I almost said it again. Almost is a good teacher if you stay in class, Niti, I said. Sheriff Callow held out a hand. Not to shake, but palm up. A question. We have the stern contractors down by the mill, he said. No one's in cuffs. They aren't, but they are writing down the names of everybody who saw them pull that dish out. Your broadcast hit my radio hard as a sermon. That back end string, our IT kid who skateboards said it's enough to make a judge nod. He hesitated, then added, Judge is Mary's sister. Mary nodded like a bell. I looked at Ives. Power first, signal second, hope last. I tapped the letters. And then this. Paper. The good kind. Callow thumbed the brim of his hat and lowered his voice. Listen, Caleb. The old-timers tell a story that the post-23 crews never shut down, even when they were ordered to. That someone kept the lights on in case the mountain forgave us. You're the first man to walk into my office with proof that story wasn't just romance. He glanced at Coda, with a partner who minds better than most deputies. Coda made no claim to rank. He sat. He breathed. Ives pulled a letter free at random and unfolded it. Onion skin, pencil. The paper held a crease like a secret. To Lowtown Board, she read. If you shut us, the map will go deaf. If we keep her, you will have 20 minutes, and 20 minutes is the difference between names and a number. Choose names. She laid the letter down and looked at Callow. That's policy. Sounds like it, he said. I can put it in a binder or I can put it in a meeting. Meetings work better. Mary poured coffee into a paper cup, handed it to me, then scratched Coda exactly where his ear meets his skull. That place that turns his whole jaw into gravity. You bringing that room back? She asked. The map. I let the steam fog my lip and stall my tongue. The question had been waiting in my coat since we pulled the lever in the quiet door. Not today, I said. We did what Pike wrote. We made it sleep clean. If we wake it again, it won't be for companies or for show. It'll be because the town decides together to listen. Hank cleared his throat. Town doesn't decide together, he said. Town fights in the diner and decides at the potluck. He looked at Mary. Skillet choir? Skillet choir, she agreed. Callow turned to Ives. You host. Clinic's neutral ground. Ives tapped the letters, and we'll open the mail like it just arrived. Something in me that had been braced since the Aurora untied its rope. Start with this one, I said, and slid out an envelope with my mother's name. I'd told myself the story all night. I'd read it alone, later, where the floor was old and the light knew my hands. But the room had better ideas about mercy. Ives unfolded it. I looked at Coda's eyes instead of the paper because sometimes you need to look at a living thing while your name learns a new angle. Ives read softly. They told me to seal it. If we do, the map will go deaf. If we don't, we go deaf to orders. I have chosen not to seal." Her voice thinned and then steadied, the way doctors' voices learn to do. "Tell Caleb that a hollow is not an absence. It is a promise." Mary put her palm flat on the table like a pledge. Hank took off his hat and then, not knowing where to put it, handed it to Coda, who accepted the role of temporary hat rack with a professional solemnity that made everyone breathe differently. Callow looked at me a second longer than a lawman usually looks at a citizen. "When the potluck happens," he said, "I'll ask the board to designate Post 23 a town asset. No leases, no procurement. If we repair it, it's with volunteers and cash jars and whatever we can pull from scrap yards. You and Pike and the other names get a wall. A small wall." He smiled with one side of his mouth. "No plaques to catch the light wrong. Add Coda," Mary said, big letters. Coda, uninterested in fonts, leaned against my knee, his old ritual of making a future. The clinic's phone rang. Ives lifted it, listened, said 3 useful words, "Bring more blankets," and hung up. She turned to me. "The mill convoy is packing. The sheriff's asking them questions they don't want to answer. The county's requesting a temporary restraining order on anything with Stern stenciled on it. Also, a teacher wants to know if she can bring 3rd graders to see a listening room so they can learn how to be quiet in a place that was built for it." "The gallery," I said. "Yes, but we go first. Clean it. Tape off the dangerous. Teach them to touch the glass with their hands behind their backs. Teach them to speak as if the mountain is in the room." Hank nodded. "I can build a railing that doesn't look like it was built to catch lawsuits." Mary clapped once, skillet bright without the skillet. "Look at us. Government." "Better," Callow said. "Neighbors." I drained the cup and found the bottom thick with a sweetness I didn't deserve. "I've got one more delivery," I said. I tapped the canvas. "To the paper that thinks the internet is a river." I looked at Ives. "You said you knew someone at the Post." She smiled. "The tired kind you keep in your pocket for when the rookies arrive." "Already mailed. Alfred and Kalispell hounded me for the files. If the river carries it, they'll bite." I set the cup down. The room tilted. Just the smallest. Like a boat learning it had a new passenger. Coda noticed first. He rose before I did, walked to the door, and sat facing it, ears tilted back. Not towards threat, toward familiar. The door opened without a knock. A man stood there in a brown coat with a patch from a winter nobody wanted on one shoulder, hat in both hands, eyes the color of pine bark. Barnes was gone. We'd buried that weight. This was Pike, older than his handwriting should have allowed, thinner than his voice had promised, but standing like a carpenter stands when the house he built turns out to have slept and woken up. "I heard a dog saved the town," he said by way of introduction. "He did," Ives answered. "He's not good at taking bows." Pike stepped in, gaze landing on the oiled canvas, then the reel, then my face like a man measuring a beam he'd cut 30 years ago. He set his hat on the counter with the careful respect a man gives to his last tool. "You found my quiet door," he said. Not a question. "We pulled it," I told him. "It worked." He nodded once, a nail set with a single sure hit. "You'll want a new set of breath stacks. I kept a few in a shed behind the North Slope shack. Figured just in case. Figured wrong for a long time." Coda walked to him and leaned his head against Pike's knee exactly once. The brief knighthood he gives to the men who remember to build rails where there should be rails. Pike's hand hovered, then committed. Rough palm on rough fur. He looked at me again, and something old in my chest sorted itself like bookshelf spines finally finding their heights. "Your father," Pike said, "broke more rules than a good man should. He also taught more boys to splice a line with their teeth than a sane man would. I tried to forgive him for the first by remembering the second. Seeing you stand here, I fail at forgiveness, proud to fail. He took a breath that had more years in it than the room did. We keep it quiet until it's ours. We'll need a postmaster, I said. 2, Ives corrected, already reaching for a clipboard and the first square in a grid that would become a town. 1 human, 1 dog. Coda eyed the clipboard like it might contain jobs. Outside, the light turned undisputedly morning. Snow sifted like flour. A plow moved past, blades singing the street smooth. In the distance, the mill convoy rolled out slower than it had arrived, several men now busy steadying stacks of paperwork instead of tripods. Mary took the skillet and hung it by the clinic door. Decoration, she said, also a reminder. To what? Hank asked. To hit what you have when the siren fails. Callow lifted his radio and said 3 sentences into it that made the town sound like a choir. Names, intersections, hot coffee at the church, a dog in the clinic you can say thank you to once. I looked at the canvas stack, then at Coda. Ready to go write our names? I asked. He cocked his head. He prefers actions to spelling. We walked back into the mountain at noon with the town behind us like a hand at our backs, paper cups raised, voices making work out of gratitude. Pike came too, carrying a wooden crate that had waited longer than he had. Ives came with a roll of caution tape and a bag of cookies, medicine for those who didn't need it but deserved it. Hank brought a drill and a kind of patience that only sawdust teaches. Mary brought a thermos and that skillet, because you don't argue with instruments that saved your neighbor's kid. The nav room accepted us without surprise. Its dark face looked old and gentle. The listening gallery's panes, cleaned with vinegar and cotton, reflected us as if we were the ghosts now. I opened the old mail and set a few letters under the glass like seed packets under frost, Ruthie's ear mountain among them. I made a small sign in pencil on a strip of manila. Names go here. We pressed our hands to the heat ink strip. The black receded. We wrote Pike in small block letters that refused to brag. Ives Hale in the tidy hand of a nurse who learned to chart without lies. Hank in a carpenter's script with the underline he gave to beams that would never fail. Mary in a flourish that made the room remember the sound of iron on railings. I wrote Caleb Rivers the way my father had taught me to sign a repair, legible, unafraid. Then I let the pencil hang where Coda could touch it, and I drew his triangle with circles beside our names. Under it, Coda. The room breathed. The gallery's quiet felt full, not empty. Pike slid the crate under the bench and patted it once, breath stacks, asleep until needed. We left the quiet door closed. The mountain had earned a nap. At the stairs I hesitated and looked back. The circular disk lay dark but not dead, like a lake in winter that knows it is still water below the ice. I pressed my palm to the rim. Thank you, I said, to the room, to my father, to the men who built rails in the dark and wrote small notes where only honest hands would find them. We'll wake you when we say. Coda leaned his head against my arm, a bell with no clapper still ringing. We climbed out into white. The sky had finally picked a color, winter's pale blue with one thin thread of sun. The town below carried on with the business of after, which is always the real story. Plows moving, bread rising, kids holding hands because someone had told them it helps to count together. Ives fell into step beside me. Delivered, she said. Late, I agreed. Not never. Coda trotted ahead, then back, tracking the lane like it was a letter we had written to ourselves and were now brave enough to read out loud. The mountain listened. So did we. Spring came late to Lowtown that year. When it did, it arrived all at once. Rivers breaking their ice like old debts, wind carrying sawdust and thaw. The snow line retreated halfway up the ridge, and for the first time in months, the mountain's scarred face looked like a face again. I'd taken to walking the old trail at dawn, not out of habit, but because the silence had changed. It was no longer the heavy, warning kind, as it was a listening silence, the kind that waits for stories, not orders. Coda walked ahead, nose down, tail at half-mast and half soldier, half citizen now. The stern men had gone. The sheriff's office still received letters from lawyers who wrote as if they were paid by the syllable. But no one came back. The town learned to call the place simply the Hollow, the way you name a friend after they've told you they're real one. The North Star Clinic kept its light on, day and night. Ives said the mountain's weather had calmed, but sometimes at 3 a.m., the monitors picked up a pulse, a pattern of pressure that matched the rhythm of human breath. I didn't tell her that I heard it too. That morning Pike and I met at the ridge overlook, a tin of screws between us, rebuilding the wooden post where the warning bell had once hung. His hands were slower now, but they knew where every nail belonged. Funny thing, he said, hammering. When you fix a door for long enough, you start to wonder what you're keeping out or in. I smiled. Depends who you think's listening. He nodded, eyes on the timber. You think the map's dead? I think it's resting, I said, and maybe learning how to dream. Coda barked once, short and sure. Yes. He walked to the edge of the overlook and stared at the valley, nose twitching to a scent none of us could follow. A moment later, the ground gave a low hum. Not power, not machine, just the earth's way of clearing its throat. We followed the hum down the slope to the old nav room entrance. The frost had melted off the hatch, revealing the old insignia, Post 23. Keep your hand on the earth. I knelt, brushed the dirt away, and the steel felt warm under my glove. Inside, the tunnel smelled of dust and iron and something else. Rain, even though the air was dry. The listening gallery's panes stood polished and still. The names on the wall, Pike, Ives, Mary, Hank, Coda, glowed faintly under the lantern's flame. And in the center of the room, the circular disc was awake again, not bright, just softly breathing, like a heart remembering its tempo. In its hollow, faint lights danced, points moving in pattern like raindrops on a pond. Looks like she's listening again, Pike whispered. Not to us, I said. Maybe for us. The speaker crackled once, not with my father's voice, nor Pike's, but a new one, soft, younger, curious. Is anyone there? This is Lowtown Primary. Our students are reading letters from the mountain today. Pike chuckled, his laugh quiet and proud. I pressed the radio button. This is Post 23, I said. We're still listening. The children's laughter came through, bright and messy and perfect. Coda barked once, loud enough to make the static dance. For a moment, the hollow map shimmered, and from its core, a single beam of light traced upward through the roof, cutting into daylight like a compass needle pointing north. It faded slowly. The hum steadied. Then the room went quiet again, but not empty. Coda lay down beside the disc, head on his paws. His reflection in the steel rippled once as if the light beneath had reached up to pet him back. Outside, the mountain sighed, and the wind carried that sound down to the town, to the clinic, to the river, to the children learning what listening really means. When we climbed out again, the ridge was warm underfoot. The bell Pike had rebuilt caught a breeze and gave a single note. Soft, clear, final. Guess she's still talking, Pike said. Guess we still are, I said. Coda nudged my hand, eyes bright. We started down the trail in wonder, leaving the hollow to its peace and the world to its new sound, a quiet that listens back. Some places never stop listening. The hollow wasn't built to keep secrets. It was built to remember voices. Voices of fathers and sons, of builders and believers, of the people who stayed when the world told them to leave. Now the storm has passed. The lights are quiet. The map sleeps beneath the ridge, and the town above it learns how to speak in smaller, kinder tones. If you listen close, past the snow melt, past the hum of the wires, you can still hear it breathing. Not as a warning, not as a code, but as a promise that no story truly ends as long as someone still listens. This was the hollow map. Thank you for walking it with us.